Hello, hello, hello. We are live. So, what we're going to be talking about today is about podcasting. So, just waiting for a few moments to see if we've got anybody else that's going to be joining us today. Possibly going to have James with us as well. So, bear with me a second while I just send out a quick message just to see who we have who would like to join us. But obviously, all of these events are recorded. So, if you want to watch them back later at your leisure, then feel free to do so. Need to remind myself how to send in message to everybody. There's a way of doing this. Possibly an easier way. Oh, here we go. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm okay. How are you?
Yeah, it's not too bad. So, as you know, we're going to be slightly theming this chat based on a request from one of our members.
Yeah.
So I've made a few notes and tried to actually prepare myself. Just sent out a quick message to see if people are able to join us live, but obviously if not a problem.
I think Alex said she was going to try and join as well, so it was good.
Yeah, it'll be the first time we've managed to sort of see how it reacts to having more than two people. So, but before we get into it, what news from your neck of the woods?
From my neck of the woods. News. Yeah. Let me just go back to my diary because I always like looking at reflecting on the week that's just gone and thinking about what it is that we've done, conversations that we've had, and possible sort of kind of opportunities that have emerged on the back of all of that. So starting last week, just at the end of last week, where just after the Huddle, I had a meeting with a guy called Adam Bostock, from a company called Small 99. And they do the People Planet Pint networking event. So that's next one's taking place on the 7th of July. And I think at the Church Street Tavern in Colchester. Alex Holloman, who's one of our members, is kind of the host of those particular events, but I think generally we're trying to promote those sorts of things, and it fits very much into our ethos and values around sustainability. So it was an interesting.
We'll put that event in the events page as well.
Yeah, we'll dig out the links and we'll contact Alex and see whether he can share the links, and we'll put it in there. So other things that we've had some sort of conversations with and the like. Where are we? Oh yeah, okay. We did our development session, which was good. That was on the 22nd. We met at the University the Innovation Centre. So there was myself, you, and Alex, and it was it was really worthwhile session, really interesting. We're thinking along the lines of how we can grow the community, how we can grow the podcast audience, what that means for the business, generally speaking, and the opportunities that presents in terms of revenues, but also in terms of the impact that we can create across the region. And so we're looking forward to that sort of kind of growing that side of things and how we can actually move that forward. We had our 6th session of the Essex Business Accelerator event, and that was great on Tuesday morning. Again, a very active group of people, so plenty of whom are within the community already, but ultimately looking at ways that we can sort of help and bolster those sorts of businesses within that area. Then I had yesterday some really interesting conversations, a meet up with a guy called Josh Colchester. He actually hails from this kind of the part of the world, but he was in London really, and he's working or he leads a community called Systems Innovation Community. And I found them on Twitter, and then kind of looked them up and started to. They produce a phenomenal amount of good stuff in terms of content and thinking around systems, which is, anybody that knows me, is a real sort of kind of passion of mine, thinking about bigger problems and the like. And so we had a really, really interesting conversation that potentially could lead to maybe some opportunities to work together, some collaborations. And then I had a meeting with a guy called Giles Metcalf, who from a digital marketing agency. He's based up in Lancaster, but is it Lancaster or was it Lancashire? And I'm trying to think of actually the name of the place. So it wasn't Lancaster, it was Lancashire, and I'm just trying to think, but I can't think where exactly it is. But he was really interesting because he does website audits for environmental and social output. So you wouldn't think that a website would have a significant impact on the environment, but actually a lot depends on the size of the website, the speed of the website, the hosting environment of the website. There are some very ethical hosting companies out there, and I did some digging yesterday on some particular ones, and those websites that contribute either to reduce CO2 through some offsetting scheme or something along those lines that can actually help mitigate your own production of CO2 through web generation. And of course, the big thing with a lot of the capacity that we have on our websites and the like is who hosts them and where their servers are, what their servers are churning around in terms of kind of energy and cooling and all the rest of it to get to that particular point. So that was an interesting area. You learn something on these conversations all the time, which I love.
I suppose one thing people are saying is that there's no such thing as the cloud. It's just somebody else's computer.
Well, it is at the end of the day, isn't it? I guess I don't know enough about that kind of thing. I'd like everybody else take for granted, the presumption is always that, hey, look, we're a virtual business, or we don't have bricks and mortar, we don't do this, we don't do that. I don't drive meetings very often. I tend to, do this, that, and the other. But actually, when you accumulate and when you think about all of those points, and when you're focused upon every aspect of your business, whether it's kind of thinking it through from the point of view of your value chain, where you're getting your product, where you're buying things, how you're buying things, then all of a sudden, when you add it all up, you realize actually you do have a legacy, you do have a footprint. And like you said, your belief that you're actually putting stuff up into the atmosphere and it's just sitting in this big white fluffy thing above us, well, that's actually not true. There is a server, and that server sits somewhere, and that server sits in the States, the Europe, whatever, which is again kind of interesting because you've got a lot of kind of considerations around GDPR and where your data is being held and how it's being held and all that kind of stuff. But it's an interesting world, and I think there's certainly a lot there. Again, as we're going through our kind of B Corp stuff, and as we're thinking about the implications of that B Corp land, then we have to start to really evaluate and consider our footprint in everything that we're doing. And I think that's the kind of the message in that regard. Other call yesterday I had was an Australian guy. He's actually out on the Gold Coast in Australia, and I had a meeting with him in our morning, his evening, and ultimately he does a process of kind of collaborating and helping and supporting those people at the end of the day who are creating side hustles, those people that are creating businesses that run alongside their everyday job and their everyday life, a bit like what you're doing and a bit like what kind of Alex is doing. We're building the weave, but at the end of the day, we all have to pay the bills. And if the weave's not going to be paying the bills just at this moment, then where is it going to be paying the bills in the future? And ultimately, you've got to kind of run the business as a side hustle next door to that. So it's quite an interesting chat. I'm not sure where because we're very focused on the regional sort of kind of impact. I'm not sure where collaboration opportunities emerge within that particular frame. And then that's pretty much the week, I think. I think the most sort of kind of other areas is building a list of people who are interested in being on the podcast. So that list is growing, and it's part of the reward system. Sorry, Adam, what did you say?
Indeed, yeah, and that's certainly one of the more exciting aspects of the podcast is seeing who's coming up next.
Yeah, and we've got next week. Obviously, is half term, so we're taking a break from the EBA next week. But we've got a meeting with next Friday with a legal firm, and who are specialists within the world of startups and starting out businesses, and they're also specialists in sort of kind of B Corp stuff as well. And that was a recommendation that came from one of our university students who completed their legal stuff. And so ultimately there's a good opportunity to think about that and what we can do. Maybe there's some collaboration within the legal space that we can put together again to support businesses. And then we've got kind of other bits and pieces, but we've got the launch of the podcast, our launch of the podcast on the 31st of May. And I am super excited about that. I think Interwoven, the voice of the startup community for North Essex, I think it's a really interesting project. I think we've got a lot of really interesting potential guest speakers in the pipeline, both from the region and outside the region. We're going to be growing that audience. We're going to be looking for those opportunities to really sort of bring some very, very interesting people in and complement those other podcasts that are relevant to what we're doing and sort of where we're in. So literally what we can do to actually help bring and think through what it is about the podcast that enhances the value of being a part of this community, both from the visibility of raising, our community and the people within it, to shining a light on the region, to really kind of bringing a focus to and an energy to what we're actually all about.
Which is a good segue into the topic of today. So,
yeah,
when thinking about podcasting, the natural way of doing it is to break it down into three distinct sections, a sort of timeline. Firstly, from planning, production, and then hosting. So, from the planning perspective, we'll look at that for a few minutes. Then, with planning, I suppose it's the first thing about to say, and the thing that's probably going to get brought up quite a few times is things are a lot easier now than what they were when I first started, which is probably the same for many things that you can talk about. So the first thing to think about for me is, what is your sort of style? What is your message, the sort of tone of voice, the sort of thing that you're trying to convey? And a lot of people that I've spoken to have been thinking about starting a podcast have always had a kind of anxiety about entering a space that they feel is already quite full. And the analogy that I always used to give was that I like to watch things on YouTube about true crime, and there's many different types of videos and people that are creating content around that subject, and I subscribe to multiple different ones, and they may cover the same stories and the same details may get revealed, but it's about different people having their own different style. Some people might look at it more of an analytical, some people might be more tongue-in-cheek, some people might be more sensational. It's about feeling that confidence to enter a space where you may be slightly unsure about because of the amount of stuff that's already there, but not wanting to enter that because there's already people who are talking about those sort of things shouldn't preclude you from wanting to do that. And then thinking about having made that decision, it's settling on a sort of purpose for the podcast. So are you doing it as a personal passion project, or are you doing it for some sort of business marketing kind of thing? Or are you trying to entertain? Are you trying to gain subscribers to a certain thing? Is it a sort of side channel in relation to what you're already doing? So maybe you've got like a business and you just want to have this as an auxiliary to kind of form of communication. So, with that in mind, the other thing to think about is definitely regularity. It's the same sort of advice for YouTube channels, for newsletters, to give people something to look forward to and give people something to sort of expect and to have, they can hang their hat on and sort of say, I'm going to look forward to this the first Monday of the month or last Friday of the month, these sort of things. It's whatever regularity you feel you can commit to is something that you should really try and enshrine as best you can, because I'm guilty of this myself, of making things and not sticking to a schedule, and the audience that you do builds up kind of forgets that you're there and maybe drift off and these sort of things. You can get too obsessed by the quality of the things that you create and slip on a schedule that you've set yourself, when in reality perfectionism is the sort of the death of creativity. It's where you're so obsessed about making something perfect that you kind of lose sight over the great message. So with that in mind, I've got something to show, a few of my toys. So I've said this many times about podcasting, and that's not the equipment that you use, it's just getting out there and doing it. But there's a few sort of things that I've used in the past. There's a little microphone that you can just plug straight into your phone to make things sound a bit better. You can spend a bit more money and get proper sort of interview style mics. The microphone that I'm using here, and I've used, I think, more or less exclusively for all the podcasts that I've been a part of, is just a simple microphone that plugs into, try and put it down slowly without making too much of a noise, just plugs straight into your computer. Now, back in the day, these used to cost a fair bit of money, but these are quite ubiquitous now and of pretty good quality, and you can pick these up for a fairly good price. But ultimately, it's not the technology that's the issue. Many of the podcasts that I've made, which have been of pretty good quality, have just required using a phone. And if you're really worried or recording in a windy environment, you can get these little sort of sock things and just stick it over the edge where the microphone is, and there you go. That's a perfectly reasonable and adequate way of recording audio for yourself and for sharing for other people. And these sort of things are pennies. But as I've said in previous huddles, when companies are doing big demonstrations of their new technology, they're very keen to explain, like, well, we've got so many more megapixels. But one thing they're less sort of keen to talk about is the improvements that they've made in the quality of their audio. Nowadays, you can record live music, you can record voice, and if you want a testament to that, just look back at some of the old videos you may have recorded on your older phones when you went to concerts. You thought, oh, this is a brilliant concert, I want to capture this for future posterity. And when you get back home and look at the video, you can just see blurry flashing lights and just sound which sounded nothing like when you were there. But nowadays, many people can record pretty good quality audio just from their phone. So it's always nice to have a desire to obtain better technology and better access to better quality microphones and maybe soundproofing or these sort of things. But again, the key message, I suppose, with all of these things is don't let that be the thing that's stopping you from starting, because 99% of the people have already got everything that they need. So when thinking about recording, you've got to also think about, are you just going to be a stream of consciousness podcaster, so just talking into a microphone, probably the most simplest way of making a podcast, or are you going to try and make things a bit more complicated in one way or dynamic in another way by having another person or an interview style conversation, in which case, again, things were a lot more difficult back in the day, but nowadays things like Zoom can record the audio for you, so you don't have to have long conversations with your co-host or your interview subject asking them to record their own audio. Usually you can just get a program like Zoom or whatever to do that for you. And then with music, you've got to then think about, well, music is always going to enhance the experience. It's going to make things a bit more dynamic and a bit more exciting, but obviously you've got to find places that can allow you to have music that you can use, because a lot of these podcast services now use the same sort of technology that YouTube does in identifying music, flagging it, and then causing you potential problems in the future if you've not got the relevant sort of licenses for these sort of things. But thankfully, there's a lot of websites out there which offers free music, or music that can be used in the sort of Creative Commons. So as long as you're not doing it for commercial projects, then that's fine. And similarly with sort of things like sound effects and snazzy transitions. But a lot of that again is fluff, and a lot of these things can be distracting. And when it comes to actually having recorded your audio, one thing that I find that a lot of people forget, which is a real bugbear of mine, is that once you've recorded it, and perhaps you're speaking to somebody else who's also recording their own audio, perhaps as a co-host or as an interview subject, you could have spent ages sort of tweaking your levels and making sure that your voice sounds sort of nice and crisp and deep and resonant, and they may be far away from their microphone. So one of the worst things is when you're listening to something like that is you're listening and it sounds great, and then all of a sudden somebody's quiet, so you have to turn the volume up when you're listening, and then all of a sudden somebody else comes in, it's really, really loud. Back in the olden days, you had to go in and put these audio tracks into like a big editor and sort of fiddle around. But now you can get fairly inexpensive bits of software called normalizers or levelers. And what you do is you put the entire block of interview where you're happy with it. So once you've sort of chopped up, got rid of all the ums and the ers and all the other pauses that you don't want to keep in, you just dump it straight into this program. It analyzes it and it comes out all as if you're using the same microphone and the same sort of sound volume, which I do that with every bit of audio. No matter how confident I am that I can hear that it sounds the same, I just like to have that bit of reassurance that if somebody's driving their car on to work and listening, that they're not going to have to be constantly fiddling with the volume to make things sound right. And just having a quick look, and I see that Michael's here and has asked a question. The biggest barrier I have is a vision for it to be edited and uploaded to YouTube as well as shorter clips. Yeah, so I suppose software is a big thing. I mean, I'm a Mac user, but the one bit of software that I've always used and is on every platform, and it seems to have been around for everywhere, is Audacity, which is a great bit of open source software for audio editing. It's not quite as pretty as some of the other software, like GarageBand is something I use for the Mac, which comes free. So if you've got a Mac, I don't know if there's a similar sort of bit of software for Windows, but you can get alternatives which are free and open source. And it's a similar kind of process as to using video editing software, where you maybe have like one track underneath for music, and you can sort of up and down the volume when people are talking, and then you just put blocks of audio where you want it, and it just scans through the timeline, and you can adjust where things start and stop like that. And also you can do fancy things like select bits of the audio you want to export out. So if you only want to have like the beginning bit as like a little teaser, you can do that. You can do that sort of thing in Audacity, but it's a little bit less user friendly. So if you do happen to have a Mac, then GarageBand is, while it's more tailored towards music production, it's perfectly fine to create pretty good sounding podcasts in software like that. But yeah, things like this is just you need a microphone and the opportunity and the knowledge of what you want to talk about. So I don't know if Michael wants to jump in and have a chat as well, if he's got some more questions. But James, are you able to pop a little something into the chat just to see if Michael would like to come in? And while that's have a think. So if you're all happy and you've created your audio, and then you've rendered it out and you've made your little audio file, then what do you do with it then? Again, back in the olden days, back when I was a young little podcaster, used to have to go through all sorts of hassles of finding somewhere to host it, and you upload it via FTP to your server, and then you have to take that file and put it into a feed generator. I have nightmares even recalling it. But nowadays, obviously, there's lots of services, and the right service depends on the sort of content that you're creating. So, for example, one of my little side hustles is making a music show. And obviously, the problem of uploading music and talking about it is somebody needs to be paid for that music. And there's a service called Mixcloud. So if you're using predominantly, purchasable music that you don't own the license to, or if you want to sort of critique Madonna's new album, then Mixcloud is a really good service because it allows you to upload music that you don't have a license to, and it sort of pays for that license for you. So your subscription to that service covers that.
How do we get Michael in?
How do we get Michael in?
Yeah.
We can do it by clicking a few buttons like this, possibly. Through the magic of technology. So hopefully Michael's got an invite. Yeah, so Mixcloud's really good. So if you're using a lot of music like that, but if not, there's other services. There he is.
Hi, Guy. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Afternoon, both. How are you both? You all right?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Very well indeed.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thanks for your tips, Adam. That was appreciated. Would it help if I gave a real brief bit of context for why I'm an avid listener today? I'm looking. My name's Michael Glassick. I do various jobs, but one of the hats I wear is as a career and confidence coach for people in their 20s and 30s looking to transition careers. And what I find would be incredibly helpful is to have a podcast talking not just about people's limited mindset and barriers and that big bit, but also some of the practical elements of, you look at your stereotypical careers like teacher, policeman, lawyer, solicitor. And it would be great, I thought, if I could find some of those people who I have in my network and talk to them and say they're 3-5 years down the line, if they were to do that again, if they had a brother or a sister that they would recommend to join that career, what are some of the things they would have done differently? What are some of the skills they need? What are some of the more practical elements around education? And have that as a bit of a basis, but then do the more interesting chat, which I like, is the more deeper conversations around mindset and other areas. So this is that's where I'm coming from, but I'm definitely have that perfectionist trait. And that can have a bit of creative paralysis sometimes, where this big vision in my mind of, I do a video, it's on YouTube, I clip it up to shorts and stuff and all the rest of it. So yeah, very interested, Adam.
So I suppose one thing to think of is are you going to be doing both of those kind of conversations in the same sort of podcast? You could kind of have like two separate podcast episode styles. You could have like a stream of consciousness kind of deep thought conversation, and then you could have catch-up chats with people that you know and who have made efforts along their journey to better themselves. Again, obviously, the microphone that you're using now is perfectly fine just to record on and make a show. Like Alex, our co-host, uses, she's got lots of technology, but I think she was a bit stumped at the time, but just a simple headset mic is perfectly fine. When I was first starting, a lot of these things were like, you shouldn't even attempt to begin unless you've got something of really good quality. And Alex has got things like microphone plugs into a mixer, which then plugs into your computer, and all of that just gives me chills, because the pathway for things to go wrong will just give me anxiety. Whereas now, like I say, a phone is perfectly fine. And I've done sort of interviews with people just sort of passing the phone back and forward. So you could either meet people physically and do it that way, or get them on Zoom, and which is probably more likely, and do things that way.
Yeah.
So as far as the physical aspect of recording things, then that shouldn't be a problem. Are you a Mac or a PC person?
I am a Mac, so I heard your recommendation around GarageBand, so I definitely, and I have downloaded Audacity already. So
have you? Well, there you go.
I was thinking about there's a dual piece around, like, obviously I want the video available to share on platforms, because I think that's quite a immersive and engaging way, like a YouTube, like a TikTok, like an Instagram. But equally, I need to be able to do the editing of the sound. Hence those two platforms I might check out.
Yeah, I think like podcasting is certainly, since the pandemic, has had more of a resurgence. But I think I've always felt that podcasting for me has been like the superior art form for two reasons. Firstly, many years ago, when there was a sort of an audio version of Twitter, I was sort of chatting to people who were nearby and these sort of things. And one person spoke to me and said the reason why she loved audio so much was that she was severely sighted and had real sort of sight difficulties, and she felt that audio was created and everyone experiences it in the same way. So it's a leveling experience. So whether you've got 20/20 vision or whether you're completely blind, you're still experiencing what the intended creator has created for you in the same way. And also, obviously, with video, it's a lot more time consuming to create, but also a lot more time consuming for people to engage with. If you've got, I sit here with sort of nice speakers and nice microphone, but the reality is the majority of people aren't going to be sitting down with their eyes closed, absorbing my voice. They're going to be, doing the hoovering or sort of stacking the dishwasher or driving to work. And you're not competing for people's sole attention when you're making a podcast. You're kind of augmenting their chores is probably more likely the thing. So in that sense, there's a lot easier, there's a lot less barriers for entry for people's time and attention. And GarageBand is just so simple to use, really, and there's tons of tutorials out there. So I think you're pretty much on your way there. You just need to get on Canva and design yourself a logo or something.
And funny enough, I've done that. Of course, I am one of these. I don't do things half-heartedly. So I've done the Canva logo. I've got a nice little Excel spreadsheet of like potential guests and potential topics, potential titles, and all the rest of it. It's just that I'm at that final place of like equipment, software for hosting, software for editing, and then
software for hosting isn't a problem, because we used to use a service called Anchor, which has now been bought out by Spotify.
Yes, I saw that.
Which is fair enough. The good thing about Anchor is that they kind of recognize that the space, like if you can have a service like YouTube for video where people aren't required to pay for it, then it seemed like madness that people were having to pay to host a podcast. When would they ever see a return on that investment? Would it be more than just, for a lot of the thought of times that I was making podcasts, it was a financially draining hobby, because I was paying for my creative expression, and I was just taking that financial hit because I needed to express myself. But now with things like Spotify for podcasting, you can create as many accounts as you've got email addresses and upload as much audio, because the way in which they get their money back is obviously because it drives people to Spotify as the place now, and also it propagates to all other really easily to all other podcast hosting platforms. But what they want to try and do is maybe advertise on your podcast. So how you hear podcasts from sort of 10 years ago and get an uncanny advert for something that's relevant right here and now. That's because obviously they're inserting adverts directly into your podcast feed.
Yeah.
Obviously, the majority of the podcasts I was making, they weren't really interested in, because no one was going to advertise for such a small amount of things like that, and that wasn't the purpose of it. But it's good to have at least one company and maybe a couple more others that are recognizing that space on a server, as me and James were talking about, is particularly cheap. Storage space isn't particularly massive, and audio files tend not to go too big. So making people pay for it just seemed such a barrier to so many people that I think I can't think of any other reason to recommend anybody else other than Spotify at the moment, unless you've got a complete conviction against them. I'm sure some people do.
Yeah. And what do you suggest for, I'm thinking of questions not that just apply for me, but for other people listening. I heard the normalizer piece. So I'm thinking that it's that editing piece that a lot of people often have questions around, in terms of, do you suggest outsourcing? You've got websites like Fiverr and other freelance websites where especially with me, I'm thinking almost that it's those. There's a very, very famous podcast, Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett, which many people would kind of recognise. And he's very clever how he clips things up to kind of garner people's attention to then listen to the full podcast. And I wondered how, I suppose I'm going in at the deep end, I suppose, as I do with most of my life. But,
that's quite, I mean, things like a normalizer is really simple to do. So basically, once you've sort of got all the audio how you like it, and you put it into GarageBand or whatever, before you've got your sort of music, and you basically say, right, this is how I want it to sound. You can then sort of switch off all your sort of sound effects, switch off all your music, and just export all the speaking, drag it and drop it into a normalizing bit of software. I mean, the one I've got from Mac is called, I think it was only a couple of quid in the App Store, MP3 Normalizer, spelled with a Z, obviously. And you just drag an MP3 file into it, and it analyzes it. And the good thing about it is once you put it back into Audacity, you can sort of see the original sort of zig, small zig, big ones, and then you can see it as all like one big block, and it just sounds good. I'm sure purists would want to go through that process with a more of a fine tooth comb, but for me, like I say, if you're just listening to on headphones, or if Alexa's playing it while you're sort of chopping up vegetables, it's good enough. And again, it saves you a lot of time, and it saves you having to outsource editing and these sort of things. And then while you're listening back to it, if you sort of think, oh, that's a really good quote, that guy's just nailed that, or she's really sort of brought out something, just write down the timestamp, and just say, 3:14, really good quote. And then find what we've done with our trailer is we went to these sort of open source, free to use music places and just sort of found a dynamic boppy bit of music and just created a separate. In fact, actually, what we did was we put it at the end of the main episode. So I went through the main episode and sort of cut bits out of it and just dragged all the way to the end and just made a little sort of trailer section, and you can sort of just export that one little section. So I went through and just found the bits that really sounded dynamic and exciting and just did it that way. It probably took about 15, 20 minutes. Amazing. So again, the temptation might be to sort of get somebody on Fiverr to do it, but then you've got to do that every time, and then you think, okay, so that's time that takes, that's money, and then you think it's the age-old problem of, do I ask somebody to do it, or is it just quick enough just to do it myself for the amount of back and forth that you might have to get to say, oh no, it's not quite right, or I wasn't quite feeling the music, and then like I say, just chuck it up on Spotify, and you can, things like Google, you can create aliases for your email address, so you don't even have to have separate email addresses. You can create as many different email addresses as you like to have different tests. So what we've done with our one is we've got one that's the sort of the main public one, and then we've got one that we can have as a members only version. Downside being is that it still gets sent to Spotify, so technically somebody could still find that link and then send it on to their mates and get the same member experience. But we kind of hope that's a lot of effort for somebody to do for something that they could experience more dynamically for free, but just by joining the community. But you could also have one as sort of like a test bed for sort of testing and sharing off with your friends or these sort of things to get opinions on, or to have one as like main episodes and one perhaps with more snappy versions. So if people are maybe time stretch, you could have one version that's maybe sort of 10-15 minutes key points, or people who are really interested and want to do like a deep dive, they could get like a subscribe to the premium version, or the extended director's cut as opposed to the express version. Any other questions?
No, that's
to ramble on a bit.
No, your passion shines through. It's not ramble, it's passion. No, that's really, really helpful. I think I just need to get on and do it, to be honest. I think that I'm very good in terms of taking consistent action with most things, and I know this is a medium that I would lend myself well to, and especially in terms of you said at the beginning, it is a marketing asset. Something like coaching is a long form conversation, and inherently you're buying the person. Yes, you're buying solutions, find the person. So podcast is a very good link to that, where you have an extended conversation and get the philosophies, the mindset, and the the charisma from that person you're ultimately going to receive a service from. So that's why it naturally attracted me.
And I suppose people could be sniffy and say that these are thoughts that aren't necessarily unique. A lot of these concepts in coaching and psychology are, but the thing that makes it unique is that no one's heard you saying it, or no one's heard your opinion on it. And just like with the true crime thing, you can find 100 true crime video channels, but I subscribe to probably more than is healthy, because I like the personalities of the different people who are talking about the same sort of thing. So it sounds like you're well on the way. And most problems with creative endeavors is that people are often either afraid to start because they feel as if they've not got the right sort of microphones or all these sort of gadgets, or they feel a sense of anxiety that what if I put a lot of my effort and soul into something that nobody's going to listen to, which may well be true in the first weeks, months, even longer. But the thing is, you've got to keep to that schedule, keep to that passion, and keep on producing. And in time, one person might start listening, two, sharing it along, more. And this is how these things start. You're very lucky if you happen to have a dedicated audience straight away, if you've already got like a massively successful YouTube channel and are then branching out into separate, or if you've got a humongous newsletter subscriber base who are just biting your hand off for a podcast. But most people start something very small and nurture it like a garden, and then through that time, effort, and energy and passion, it produces.
Michael, can I ask you something? You do your lives really well on LinkedIn, right? You do your walking around thinking and communicating. What do you do with your audience at the end of that? What's your call to action for them at that particular point?
It's a really, really good question. So in the lives currently, the ones you reference, so I often on a Sunday, usually every fortnight, I kind of say one thing I've learned, one thing I'm grateful for that week, and kind of share that knowledge with others. And I often end it with hope you have a good week next week. But what I perhaps maybe should do is include more of a consistent call to action around if any of this resonated with you and you would like to expand on these ideas, please reach out or please message me. Or even I think a comment in the video, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that they're often, and I had this with a lady that was working, Sarah, she's part of the community as well, and she was working with us on the Essex Business Accelerator program, and we've been talking about messaging and language and getting your upping the energies and doing all of that with the emotional connections. And what she did a particular post on LinkedIn that went very, very well. But then she realized potentially that she then had to keep qualifying, going back in, doing stuff with it, because she never left anybody a real pathway to actually the next stage of that piece of engagement. And the one thing that you want to do in reality is start to use your audience, give them an opportunity to stay connected with you so that you can start building your email list. So what I would be saying, what we're trying to do with everything we're here is that engage with us, do this, whatever, but then let them go somewhere where you can capture that piece of information for a newsletter, whatever it is that you want to provide, to an additional piece of value. That way, you give them the opportunity of staying connected, and you grow your email list so that when you launch your podcast, you're launching it directly into their inbox with an established audience. And the issue is almost saying, okay, I've got a great piece of traction that we've got through LinkedIn. Those lives, the walking, the doing all of that is a great route and a pathway. But now what we need to do is drive them into another space where we can actually take them away from LinkedIn, which is a battle, because LinkedIn don't want you to leave, but to actually take them into another space. And that's why, to a degree, we created the community space that we've got here, is so that we can start to build that audience and offer more and more personalized value to everybody that then starts to come in some shape or form. So it becomes less generic, but more specific to the needs of that audience.
Yes. Yeah. I like that idea. I often have the image of a sales funnel. There's two. There's a sales funnel, and there's the kind of step in terms of like a ladder. And there's the piece of kind of free content, small, cheap piece of content that delivers maximum value, core offer, signature offer. And it's, I kind of, as you're talking, I can hear that. I can hear go to a newsletter, weekly, monthly value, it goes through there. Then it's introducing to an initial small offer, which again, it might be a one-off session, or it might be a values inventory exercise, etc. That's priced at a very small price. Then that leads to core offer, and you're building that trust and that long-term value from a customer over a period of time. So yeah, it's definitely, I feel like it really excites me, to be honest. I've always had that want and need to kind of scratch that entrepreneur itch from a little boy, but I never knew what the business or practice would be. And in the last couple of years, I feel like I've finally found that piece of, I've always wanted to run a business. Now potentially I found the thing that business might be.
And I'll share. I shared because Sarah's doing sort of kind of a piece of work around supporting people with. She's a medical writer, and she's got a community of medical writers, and so she's doing a lot of work within that particular sort of market or segment or niche or however you want to call it. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of relevance to helping people through career transition and doing a lot of that kind of stuff. But I'll share some resources that we've got or whatever, and I'll put those into the community. We're going to create a channel in the community as well, which is all going to be about partnerships and partnership conversations. So people that we're talking to that are saying, look, this is Creative Commons stuff, or we can drive traffic into their businesses that offers value to the community. And again, if we can do the same with you, we'll absolutely do the same. So if there's stuff there that we can create, and we'll build those partnerships and relationships, and that will give everybody within the community the starting of what I would like to believe is a kind of collaborative market space, a marketplace for resources and a marketplace for support and for development and helping people to actually kind of latch into that particular space.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that career transition piece is growing. You always hear about the midlife crisis. There's often this quarter life crisis where people go to university, come out, they're in that cubicle, they're looking around thinking, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? And I think that's grown in terms of awareness as well. And I suppose that's the kind of area I'd like to help support. But thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it. And
no problem.
I don't want to take any more of your.
No, we're going to draw a line under it there anyway. But thanks very much for joining us, Michael. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. And thank you, Adam, for leading that conversation. That was really interesting.
It's all right, and we look forward to sharing your podcast when you've done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who knows? I might even have yourselves on it. How you know?
we might be
good.
graced with an invite.
Exactly.
Quid pro quo, mate. You'll be on ours, so don't worry.
Propagation.
All right.
Well, see you guys, and we'll see you next time.
See ya. Thanks
Cheerio.
very much indeed. Bye.